want to call them, this subgenre of horror film dates all the way back to the 1930s, with Agatha Christie's famous mystery novel And Then There Were None, seen as the early origination of the genre. However, most people associate the genre with Psycho, which was released in 1960 and directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Even though there are only 2 killings in the film, it was seen as the turning point in history. It was seen as the transition from gothic horror vampires, werewolves and monsters to modern-day realistic issues.
Psycho is based on the novel of the same name by Robert Bloch, which was in turn inspired by the crimes of Wisconsin serial killer Ed Gein. The film depicts the encounter between a secretary, Marion Crane, played by Janet Leigh, who is hiding at a motel after embezzling from her employer, and the motel's owner, the lonely Norman Bates, played by Anthony Perkins. The most iconic scene in the film, and arguably one of the most iconic scenes in film history, is the murder of Janet Leigh's character in the shower. Although there is little visible gore portrayed on the screen, the shower scene is often regarded as one of the most frightening sequences in cinema history. The film was produced on a budget of $806,000, but its gross revenue totaled $32 million.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a 1974 American horror film directed and produced by Tobe Hooper and Kim Henkel. The film stars a cast of many non-professional actors, including Marilyn Burns, Edwin Neal, Paul Partain, and of course the infamous Leatherface Gunnar Hansen.
The plot of the film revolves primarily around a group of friends on a road trip in rural Texas. The purpose of the road trip is to visit the hometown of Sally and Franklin's father, in order to check on their grandfather's grave after reports of grave robbing. After their van runs low on gas, the group of friends visit the childhood home of Sally and Franklin's father, where they are attacked by a family of cannibalistic men, including the infamous Leatherface. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre influenced subsequent films in the subgenre, and is the first of 4 Chainsaw films, followed by a remake in 2003.
The film features a cast of many non-professional actors, including Marilyn Burns, Edwin Neal, Paul Partain, and Gunnar Hansen. The film, despite its label as excessively graphic, does not so much rely on the explicit gore to generate terror in the audiences, as it does on pacing, suspense, deserted location, and dramatic tension. Like Psycho, Deranged, and The Silence of the Lambs, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was inspired by Wisconsin serial killer Ed Gein. It is true that Gein wore a mask, however he was never recorded as using a chainsaw in any of his killings. The interior of the house was also based on the crime scene notes describing the inside of Gein's home. The film was an independent production, produced on a budget of only $83,000, however it grossed over $36 million at the US box office in 1974. This made it the most successful independent film ever made until surpassed by Halloween in 1978. Halloween is a 1978 American independent horror film based in the fictional Midwestern town of Haddonfield, Illinois. The film was directed by John Carpenter and stars Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode and Nick Castle as the infamous Michael Myers. The film centres on Myers' escape from the psychiatric hospital, his murdering of teenagers, and Dr. Loomis's attempt to track and stop him. The film is widely regarded as one of the most influential in the horror film genre. Halloween was produced on a budget of only $325,000, but grossed over $47 million at the United States box office, making it one of the most independent, profitable films ever made.
Friday the 13th is a 1980 independent slasher film directed by Sean S. Cunningham and written by Victor Miller. Although the film was poorly received by most mainstream film critics, it went on to become one of the most popular slasher films in cinema history. The film tells the story of a young boy named Jason Voorhees, who drowned in a camp's lake in 1957. In 1958, 2 camp counselors were murdered. In 1962, the fires in Badwater thwarted to reopen the Crystal Lake camp. And finally, in 1979, Crystal Lake was reopened by Steve Christie, with the help of a few new counsellors.
Ignoring the warnings from a local wacko, the murders start once again by a mysterious stalker who turns out to be Jason's mother, Pamela Voorhees, who blames her son Jason's drowning on the fact that 2 counsellors were having sex and were unaware of Jason struggling in the lake.
The film opened in 1,100 theatres, taking in $5.8 million in its opening weekend. Domestically, the film has made $39.7 million on a budget of only $550,000.
If you've watched as many slasher films as I have, you'll know that there are certain codes of conventions that you always need to follow. Number 1, never answer your phone. Hello? Avoid alcohol. And never do drugs. Never have sex. The victims in slasher films tend to be far away from home, or as I mentioned earlier, they're usually involved in sexual activities or illegal drug use. The film typically begins with the murder of a young woman and ends with the final girl, who manages to overpower the killer, only to realise that the problem has not yet been completely solved. In a slasher film, the killer almost always uses unconventional weapons, such as blades, cleavers, knives and blunt objects, and rarely uses guns. These weapons provide the audience with a very sexual connotation when murdering female characters, as they are phallic symbols, and the film will often spend a lot more time on the woman's death than the man's. The killer is generally able to withstand most of his victims' attempts to defend themselves, so even after being stabbed, bludgeoned, electrocuted, burned or drowned, he is miraculously able to continue stalking his victim. Sometimes in slasher films the killer is at the very least understood, and not just feared. Silent Night, Deadly Night, Slaughter High, The Funhouse, Castle Freaks, Creep, Offerings and Midnight Ride can all be described in this way. I'll be right back after this. Oh, and number 3, you should never say that.